Alright, settle in, history buffs and connoisseurs of chaos. Tonight, we're diving headfirst into the life of a man who didn't just make his mark on history. He pretty much redrew the map with a blood-soaked sword and a truly astonishing amount of facial hair. We're talking about Genghis Khan, or as I like to call him, the original influencer, if influencing meant conquering most of the known world and leaving a trail of bewildered survivors wondering what just galloped through their village. This isn't your grandma's history lesson, unless your grandma was a 13th century nomadic warrior, in which case, wow, can I get her number? Now, a word of warning before we proceed. This video contains an uncensored amount of steppe, beards, mind-boggling raids, and hyperbole. Seriously, the hyperbole alone could conquer a small nation. We're going to be looking at a man whose ambition was as vast as the Mongolian plains, and whose methods were, shall we say, direct. If you're expecting a nuanced portrayal of a misunderstood leader, well, you might get some of that, but mostly you'll get a lot of, and then he conquered everything. So buckle up, buttercups. It's going to be a bumpy, horse-powered ride. For the optimal viewing experience, this is best watched inside a yurt by firelight, with a shaman drum for full effect. If you don't have a yurt, a dimly lit room, and a strong cup of fermented mare's milk, or, tea, will suffice. Just try to imagine the wind whipping across the plains and the distant sound of an empire being forged, one terrified scream at a time. We're about to unpack the legend, the man, the myth, the guy who really knew how to motivate a cavalry charge. Let's get into it. So let's set the scene. Our future world conqueror wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth, more like a handful of steppe dirt and a prophecy that he'd one day hold the world in his grasp, which, no pressure, kid. He was born Temujin, a name that, if you squint and mispronounce it wildly, sounds a bit like a brand of artisanal yogurt. Try Temujin's organic steppe yogurt, now with 10% more existential dread. But trust me, his early life was anything but creamy or smooth. It was brutal, harsh, and frankly, the kind of childhood that either breaks you or turns you into someone who decides to conquer Asia as a light afternoon activity. Imagine the Mongolian steppe in the 12th century. It's vast, it's unforgiving, and your nearest neighbor is probably trying to steal your sheep, or worse, your wife. Temujin's father, Yesugei, was a minor tribal chief, a somebody in a land of many somebodies all vying for slightly more sheep and slightly better grazing land. But then, disaster struck. Yesugei was poisoned by rival Tatars, a delightful welcome-to-the-neighborhood gesture common at the time. This left young Temujin, his mother Holun, and his siblings out in the cold, quite literally. Their tribe, in a move of stunning compassion, abandoned them. Sorry folks, he's dead, you're on your own. Try not to starve. Charming. This abandonment, this betrayal was the crucible. It's where the I'll show them all attitude, so crucial for any aspiring global hegemon, really began to ferment. Picture little Temujin, probably around 9 years old, scrounging for roots and berries, watching his family suffer and thinking, right, this being a victim thing? Not a fan. Duly noted. We'll rectify with extreme prejudice later. It's the classic villain origin story, except he's the protagonist of his own epic. And the villains are basically everyone who isn't him or his increasingly large group of followers. He wasn't just surviving. He was taking notes, learning the harsh lessons of tribal politics, which mostly involved a pointy stick and a willingness to use it. Life on the run was no picnic. There were kidnappings. Temujin himself was captured by a rival clan and famously escaped from a wooden stockade, which is the medieval equivalent of escaping a high-security prison using a paperclip and sheer audacity. His young wife, Borti, was also kidnapped, leading to his first major military campaign to rescue her. This wasn't just about love. It was about honor, about re-establishing his fledgling authority. Every hardship, every betrayal, every near-death experience was just another log on the fire of his ambition. He was learning that in this world, you either ate or were eaten, and Temujin was developing a very, very big appetite. He wasn't physically imposing in the way you might imagine a barbarian warlord. Descriptions suggest he was tall, with red hair and green eyes, which isn't exactly the stereotypical image. But what he lacked in brute intimidation, he more than made up for in charisma, cunning, and a terrifyingly focused will. He could inspire loyalty in men who had every reason to betray him, and he could see the bigger picture while everyone else was squabbling over scraps. He was playing chess, while others were playing checkers, if chess involved a lot more horses and summary executions. The name Temujin itself means of iron or blacksmith, which is fitting for a man who would forge an empire. But at this stage, he was less a blacksmith and more a piece of raw iron ore being brutally hammered into shape by circumstance. He learned to hunt, to fight, to lead, not from scrolls or tutors, but from the unforgiving school of hard knocks, where the curriculum was written in blood and the graduation ceremony involved not dying. This period of his life, filled with poverty, danger, and loss, was the foundation upon which everything else was built. It's the gritty backstory that makes the eventual world domination all the more, well, understandable? No, not understandable. Inevitable, perhaps. So from these humble, dirt-poor, constantly on the verge of being murdered beginnings, a resolve was forged. A resolve to not just survive, but to dominate, to ensure that he and his would never be abandoned or victimized again. He was going to show them all, and by them, he increasingly meant the entire known world. The yogurt-sounding kid was about to become a global phenomenon, and the steppe was just the appetizer. The main course, well, that was still to come, and it would involve a lot more people not having a very good day. Now let's talk about Mongolian politics in the late 12th century. If you think your current political landscape is a dumpster fire, imagine a system where election campaigns primarily involved sharp objects and term limits were usually decided by who had the bigger army or the more ruthless assassins. There were no televised debates, just lots of surprise attacks and shifting allegiances. It was less House of Cards and more Game of Thrones if everyone was a Dothraki, and the Iron Throne was just a slightly more comfortable saddle. In this delightful free-for-all, Temujin began to make his moves. He started by gathering followers, a motley crew of outcasts, loyalists, and people who just really liked his let's conquer everyone platform. His early successes in retrieving his wife Borte and a few strategic skirmishes started to build his reputation. He wasn't just Yesugei's forgotten son anymore. He was a leader, a man who could get things done, usually violently. And in this environment, that was a highly marketable skill. Think of it as a startup, but instead of a disruptive app, his disruptive technology was a highly disciplined cavalry and a willingness to ignore traditional tribal boundaries. A key figure in this period was Jamuka. Jamuka. His relationship with Temujin is the stuff of epic bromances gone tragically, bloodily wrong. They were childhood friends and a blood brother, sworn allies. They fought together. They probably shared fermented mare's milk together. They might have even braided each other's hair, who knows. For a while, they were the dynamic duo of the steppes, a formidable force. But, as with all great partnerships involving two incredibly ambitious alpha males, things were bound to get a little stabby. The details are murky, as historical details often are when the primary sources involve a lot of, and then he smote them. But the bromance fractured. The split wasn't just a petty squabble over who got the last piece of roasted marmot. It was ideological, a clash of visions. Jamuka, it seems, favored the traditional aristocratic Mongol system, where the old noble families called the shots. Temujin, on the other hand, was a meritocracy man. He promoted based on skill and loyalty, not lineage. This was revolutionary, and frankly terrifying to the established order. It meant that any talented warrior could rise, regardless of whether their grandpappy owned a particularly large herd of goats. This difference in philosophy, combined with a healthy dose of mutual ambition, set them on a collision course. The rivalry between Temujin and Jamuka became the defining conflict of this era of Temujin's rise. It was a brutal, drawn-out affair, with betrayals, shifting alliances, and battles that were less about tactical genius and more about sheer, unadulterated ferocity. Think of it as the world's most violent reality TV show, Mongol Warlord Idol, where the loser doesn't just get sent home, they get, well, you can imagine. Temujin, despite some setbacks, proved to be the more ruthless, the more cunning, and ultimately the more successful of the two. He had that singular vision, that unwavering belief in his own destiny. Eventually, Jamuka was defeated and captured. Now here's where it gets interesting. According to some accounts, Temujin offered to forgive Jamuka, to rekindle the old flame of brotherhood. Jamuka, ever the proud aristocrat, supposedly refused, asking for a noble death, one without bloodshed, as befitted a man of his station. Temujin, ever the accommodating host when it suited him, obliged by having Jamuka's back broken. A noble death indeed. No mess. Very considerate. with his greatest rival out of the way, the path was clearing. The final step in this bloody ascent came in 1206. At a great assembly, a Kurultai on the banks of the Onon River, the disparate Mongol tribes, now largely united under his banner, either willingly or because the alternative was unpleasant, proclaimed Temujin as the Khagan, the Great Khan. And he was given a new name, a name that would echo through history, striking fear and awe into the hearts of millions, Genghis Khan. The exact meaning is debated: oceanic ruler, universal ruler, very big cheese of the entire steppe, and possibly beyond. Whatever the precise translation, the message was clear. Temujin, the outcast, the yogurt-named kid, was now in charge, and he was just getting started. So you've united the Mongol tribes, you've got a cool new title, Genghis Khan. What now? Well, you've got an empire to run, or at least an empire in the making. And Genghis wasn't about to get bogged down in bureaucracy. Oh no. His administrative style was, shall we say, brutally efficient. Forget sprawling government buildings and endless committees. His office was a saddle, and his HR department was a very sharp sword. The Mongol Empire ran on a few simple principles, the first of which was a rather straightforward tax system. His tax policy was simplicity itself. Pay up, or, well, perish. It wasn't progressive, it wasn't regressive, it was aggressive. If you were a conquered territory, you were expected to contribute resources, goods, livestock, soldiers, craftsmen. Failure to comply was met with a response that made an IRS audit look like a friendly chat over tea. This wasn't about complex fiscal theories. It was about funding the war machine, and the war machine had a voracious appetite. Think of it as a subscription service. Genghis Prime. Pay your annual tribute and avoid being turned into a nomadic parking lot. Then there was the budgeting. How do you fund a rapidly expanding empire when your primary industry is conquering stuff? Simple. You conquer more stuff. It's the ultimate pyramid scheme, but with horses and arrows. New territories brought new wealth, new recruits, and new resources to fuel further conquests. It was a self-sustaining cycle of expansion. There were no quarterly earnings reports, just lists of cities that were now under new management, which usually meant significantly less populated and considerably more on fire. This approach, while not exactly sustainable in the long term, ask the Romans, was remarkably effective for a good while. And how did he manage this sprawling mobile enterprise? With an army that was the stuff of legend, and rightly so. The Mongol warrior was the 13th century equivalent of a special forces operator, a Navy SEAL, and a Tour de France cyclist all rolled into one, except on horseback and with a much higher tolerance for fermented mare's milk. Their discipline was ironclad. Disobedience wasn't just frowned upon, it was often fatally punished. They could travel incredible distances, subsisting on little food, even drinking blood from their horses if necessary. Imagine your office commute, but it's 100 miles a day, on a horse in freezing temperatures, and your lunch is dried curd. Suddenly, that lukewarm coffee doesn't seem so bad, does it? Their endurance was frankly mind-boggling. Mongol warriors were trained from childhood to ride and shoot. They could famously shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while galloping at full speed, even backwards. Try texting while walking. Now imagine that, but you're on a horse. It's trying to kill you, and someone is shooting actual arrows back. Their logistical system, the YAM, was a network of relay stations that allowed for rapid communication and movement of troops and supplies across vast distances. It was the medieval internet, but instead of cat videos, it delivered orders for invasions. Genghis also understood the importance of unity and organization. He broke down old tribal loyalties, reorganizing his army into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, the Tumen. Loyalty was to him, not to your old clan chief. This decimal system made command and control incredibly efficient. It was a flat management structure with very clear lines of reporting, and the performance reviews were, shall we say, direct. If your unit underperformed, you didn't just get a bad appraisal. You might get a one-way trip to the great pasture in the sky. So, no spreadsheets, no PowerPoint presentations, no endless meetings about synergy, just a clear vision, an incredibly disciplined and mobile army, a ruthless approach to resource acquisition, and a communication system that could outpace any rival. It was Steppe Management 101, and the final exam involved conquering most of Eurasia. He proved that you don't need a fixed capital or a complex bureaucracy to rule a vast empire, as long as everyone is terrified of you and your cavalry is really, really good at their jobs. It was brutal, it was effective, and it was entirely office-free. With the Mongolian plains firmly under his control and his army looking suspiciously like an unstoppable force of nature, Genghis Khan decided it was time to, shall we say, expand his horizons. And by expand his horizons, I mean embark on a series of conquests so vast and brutal they make Alexander the Great look like a mildly ambitious tourist. His approach to foreign policy was less diplomacy and trade, and more surrender or be annihilated. It was a simple choice, really, though most cities that chose option B probably regretted it, if only for a few terrifying moments before oblivion. His campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire, for instance, were a masterclass in terrifying efficiency. After the Khwarezmians made the colossally stupid mistake of killing his envoys, a big no-no in the how not to get invaded by Genghis Khan handbook, he unleashed the full fury of the Mongol horde. It wasn't just a war, it was an extermination. Cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench, centers of learning and culture, were reduced to rubble and mountains of skulls. He wasn't just conquering, he was sending a message, and the message was written in flaming letters 1,000 feet high, spelling out, "Do not mess with Genghis." Think of the Mongol army moving across Eurasia like a drunken, heavily armed tractor through a particularly delicate flower garden. Except the tractor is also on fire, and it actively hates flowers. The speed and coordination of their attacks were honestly unprecedented. They employed sophisticated siegecraft, often learned from captured engineers, who were presumably very motivated to share their knowledge. They used psychological warfare with chilling effectiveness. Tales of their cruelty, often exaggerated but rooted in a terrifying reality, spread ahead of them, making surrender a much more attractive option for many. And then there was the infamous Mongol surprise. This wasn't a delightful birthday party. Oh no. This was when a city, having perhaps put up a valiant but ultimately futile resistance, would finally surrender, hoping for mercy. Sometimes they got it, if they were lucky and strategically useful. Other times, the Mongols would accept the surrender, enter the city, and then proceed to slaughter the population anyway. It was a brutal tactic designed to ensure that next time, other cities wouldn't even think about resisting. Fooled you. Now you're all dead. Any questions? No? Good. The terror he inspired was a weapon in itself. Entire regions would depopulate as news of the Mongols' approach spread. People would flee, abandoning their homes and cities rather than face the horde. It's hard to overstate the sheer pants-wetting fear that the name Mongol conjured up. They were seen as a divine scourge, a punishment from God, the actual horsemen of the apocalypse. And frankly, watching them systematically dismantle established empires, it's easy to see why. They weren't just winning battles, they were ending civilizations. His conquests stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea and were pushing towards Eastern Europe. He didn't just defeat armies, he annihilated them. He didn't just sack cities, he erased them from the map. The scale of the destruction was, even by the brutal standards of the 13th century, breathtaking. Some historians estimate that the population of Persia, for example, didn't recover to its pre-Mongol levels for centuries. This wasn't nation building, this was nation unbuilding on an industrial scale. So, he came, he saw, he conquered, is a bit of an understatement. It was more like he came, he saw, he set everything on fire, killed almost everyone, and then his horses ate the grass. It was a brutal, relentless, and terrifyingly effective method of expansion. The world had never seen anything quite like it, and frankly, it's probably still in therapy from the experience. The goal wasn't just victory, it was total, crushing, unambiguous domination. And in that, Genghis Khan was an unparalleled success. A horrifying success, but a success nonetheless. Now you might be thinking, this Genghis Khan fellow, all work and no play, conquering and pillaging. Did he even have a personal life? And the answer is, oh yes, a very personal and rather prolific life. While he was out there rearranging the global geopolitical landscape with extreme prejudice, he was also, shall we say, diligently ensuring the continuation of his lineage. And by diligently, I mean he had more wives and concubines than a Las Vegas magician has white tigers, and was significantly more successful at breeding. Let's talk about the family man aspect. Genghis had several principal wives, with Borte being the most prominent and the mother of his 4 official heirs, Yochi, Chagatai, Ogedei, and Tului. These sons would go on to inherit and further expand the empire, which, as family legacies go, is a bit more impressive than inheriting a slightly used Toyota Camry. However, family harmony wasn't exactly the Khan family motto. There were rivalries, succession disputes, And probably some very awkward family dinners where someone might get poisoned over the last dumpling. But it's his, shall we say, genetic footprint that truly boggles the mind. Genghis Khan wasn't just conquering territory, he was conquering the gene pool. It's estimated that roughly 0.5% of the world's male population today, that's about 16 million men, carry his Y chromosome. 16 million? That's not a family tree, that's a family forest. A vast, sprawling, globe-spanning forest of people who can trace their paternal lineage back to one incredibly busy 13th century warlord. Talk about leaving your mark. He was the ultimate super spreader, but for DNA. This makes him, by a considerable margin, the top genetic donor of the 13th century, and possibly of all time. It's a rather unique form of immortality, isn't it? Forget statues and monuments. Your legacy is literally walking around in millions of people. It's a bit like finding out your great dash, etc. dash. Grandfather wasn't just some quiet farmer, but a man who effectively seeded a significant portion of the planet. Congratulations, it's a boy. And he has the Y chromosome of a man who once had an entire city's population systematically executed. Happy Father's Day indeed. Of course, this prolificacy wasn't just a byproduct of a healthy libido. It was also a strategic tool. Marrying off daughters to allied rulers, taking wives and concubines from conquered peoples. These were ways to cement alliances, absorb new populations, and spread Mongol influence. Every child born was potentially another loyal subject, another brick in the imperial edifice. It was family planning on an imperial scale where planning mostly involved having as many children as humanly possible, particularly sons who could lead armies and daughters who could forge alliances. So, while he was orchestrating campaigns of what can only be described as genocide-on-the-go, he was also ensuring his personal genetic line would thrive like no other. It's a bizarre juxtaposition, the destroyer of peoples and the ultimate progenitor. He was a walking, talking paradox, a man who could order the deaths of tens of thousands before breakfast, and then presumably go home to a bustling household filled with an ever-increasing number of his own offspring. It's a side of him that's less about battle tactics and more about, well, biology on a grand scale. It really puts a different spin on the term founding father, doesn't it? Most founding fathers are content with a nation. Genghis Khan seems to have aimed for a significant percentage of humanity. So, next time you're at a large international gathering, just look around. Statistically, there's a decent chance you're in the presence of a distant relative of the great Khan. Try not to bring up the whole raising cities thing at the buffet table. It can make things awkward. All good things, even terrifyingly efficient world-conquering careers, must come to an end. Genghis Khan, the man who seemed invincible, the scourge of God, was in fact mortal. Shocking, I know. He died in 1227 during a campaign against the Tangut Kingdom. But how he died? That's where things get delightfully murky, like a steppe bog in springtime. The official cause of death is as elusive as a season finale of your favorite TV show. There are theories galore, each more dramatic or mundane than the last. Was he killed in battle, struck down by a Tangut arrow? Did he fall from his horse during a hunt, an ignominious end for the world's greatest horseman? Did he succumb to illness, perhaps a fever or infection? One particularly colorful story suggests he was assassinated by a captured Tangut princess, who either stabbed him or used a hidden device to fatally unman him. Ouch. The historical record is frustratingly vague, almost as if they wanted us to spend centuries guessing. What we do know is that his death was kept secret, to ensure stability of the empire. His body was carried back to Mongolia, and this is where the mystery deepens into a full-blown historical enigma wrapped in a riddle. The secrecy surrounding his final resting place is legendary. It's the ultimate historical treasure hunt, but without a map, and with a high chance of getting cursed. According to legend, the funeral procession killed everyone they encountered on their route to ensure secrecy. Animals, travelers, unfortunate birds, all silenced. Then after the burial, the soldiers who participated were themselves killed. And then the soldiers who killed those soldiers were also killed. It's like a homicidal nesting doll of secrecy. You have to admire the commitment, even if it's terrifyingly thorough. The supposed burial site, somewhere in the Khenti Mountains, was then further obscured. Legend has it a river was diverted to flow over his grave, or trees were planted and allowed to grow into a dense forest. They didn't just want it hidden, they wanted it gone from human knowledge. Why such extreme measures? Was it fear of grave robbers? A desire to prevent desecration? or perhaps a spiritual belief about returning to Earth undisturbed. Generations of treasure hunters, archaeologists, and amateur sleuths have tried to find it, all to no avail. The Mongolian government has been very protective of the area, respecting the desire for secrecy. It's probably for the best. Can you imagine the tourist trap? Genghis Khan's tomb gift shop and fermented mare's milk stand? It would cause him to rise from the grave, and nobody wants that. So the man who redrew the world now occupies an unmarked patch of it. His death, like his life, is shrouded in legend and speculation. It's a fittingly enigmatic end for a man larger than life. He left the world not with clear documentation, but with a question mark, a final act of ambiguity that ensures he remains a mystery as much as history. And perhaps that's how he wanted it, keeping everyone guessing, even in death. So what did Genghis Khan leave behind, apart from terrified people and altered global demographics? Well, for starters, the largest contiguous land empire in history. At its peak, the Mongol Empire stretched from Eastern Europe to the Sea of Japan, from Siberia down to the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East. It was, to put it mildly, bloody enormous. You could walk for months and still be in Mongol territory, which was either very impressive or deeply unsettling. But it wasn't just about size, though size definitely mattered to Genghis. He and his successors introduced surprising innovations, or at least facilitated their spread. Take the YAM, that incredible postal relay system. It wasn't just for military dispatches. It became a vital artery for communication and trade. Marco Polo was famously impressed. So next time your package is late, just remember Genghis Khan had messages crossing continents faster than pizza delivery on a Friday night. Thanks, Genghis? Then there's religious tolerance. Now hold on. Before you choke on fermented mare's milk, this comes with a massive asterisk the size of Mongolia itself. Genghis Khan was generally tolerant of different religions as long as religious leaders prayed for him and his empire, and didn't try to start rebellions or sass him. He exempted clergy from taxation and military service across various faiths: Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Taoism. This wasn't deep-seated enlightenment, but pragmatic population control. Pray for me, don't cause trouble, and we're cool. He also promoted trade. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, allowed for flourishing of trade routes like the Silk Road. Goods, ideas, technologies, and unfortunately, diseases like the Black Death moved more freely than ever before. So you can thank the Mongols for that lovely silk scarf. And also, indirectly, for devastating pandemics. Swings and roundabouts, really. The Mongols also had a written script adopted from the Uyghurs to administer their vast domain. They established the Yasa, a legal code which, while harsh by modern standards, did provide a framework of law. It covered everything from military discipline to forbidding washing clothes in running water during thunderstorms. It was an attempt to bring order to a vast, diverse collection of peoples, primarily by telling them what not to do, or else. Of course, the primary legacy for many regions was utter devastation, depopulation, and cultural trauma lasting for generations. Entire civilizations were upended, ancient cities destroyed, and millions killed. It's a legacy written in blood and ashes, a stark reminder of brutal empire-building realities. He unified the Mongols, created an empire, and connected East and West to an unprecedented degree, but the price tag was astronomical, paid in human lives. So, no thanks needed? Well, it's complicated. For the Postal Service, maybe a grudging nod. For religious tolerance with caveats, perhaps a hesitant thumbs up. For the trade routes, okay, fair enough. But for the mountains of skulls and rivers of blood? Yeah, probably going to pass on sending a thank you card for that. His legacy is a complex tapestry woven with threads of brutal conquest and surprising innovation, a testament to a man who changed the world, whether the world wanted to be changed or not. So, there you have it. Genghis Khan, father, conqueror, global phenomenon, and the reason your DNA test might be more interesting than you thought. His story is a wild, brutal, and undeniably epic ride through the pages of history. A man who started with virtually nothing and ended up with pretty much everything he could lay his hands on, a rather substantial chunk of the planet. History isn't always made by the good guys, or even the slightly morally ambiguous guys. Sometimes, it's made by the guys with the biggest horses and the sharpest swords. All it takes is cruelty, determination, and devilish charisma to enter history. Or at least someone's DNA test results. He didn't spend his time building grand palaces or writing philosophical treatises. He was too busy conquering it. His monuments were not made of stone, but of subjugated nations and terrifying ambition. When his armies passed through, they didn't leave libraries and universities. They left silence, ash, and open grazing land where cities used to be. Yet his impact was undeniable, reshaping the world in ways that still echo today. So let's raise a glass to Temujin, the boy from the harsh steppes who became the great Khan. The man who proved that, with a horse, a bow, and killer-level charisma, the world is your ancestral pasture. Just try not to trample all the flowers on your way through. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe check your ancestry. You never know.